The galaxy was quiet that morning, just like it had been for 300 years. The massive space station called Prima Central floated in the void between three bright stars. Its crystal towers reached out like fingers trying to touch the darkness. Around the station, thousands of ships moved in perfect lines, bringing goods from one world to another. Ambassador Kira stood in her office watching the ships through the great window. Her blue scales caught the light from the nearest star, making her look like a living jewel. She was from the Veltani Empire, one of the oldest and most powerful groups in the galaxy. Today was supposed to be just another boring day of meetings and trade talks. On the other side of the galaxy, something very different was happening. Captain Jiho Kim walked across the bridge of his ship. The UES Retribution was not like the peaceful trading vessels that filled the space lanes. It was 3 kilometers of black metal and weapons designed for one purpose only: war the sea. Ship had been built in secret deep in the Sol system, where humans lived their quiet lives away from the rest of the galaxy. For 3 centuries, they had stayed in their corner of space, making things and learning things, and most importantly, getting stronger, much stronger. Lieutenant Minho Park sat at his station watching the screens that showed empty space ahead. They were traveling faster than any alien ship could match, heading toward a part of the galaxy that humans had not seen for generations. His fingers moved over the controls, checking and rechecking their position. Commander Yuna Lee stood beside Captain Jiho, looking at the star maps spread across the main display. The Kepler sector stretched out before them, full of worlds that had once known human names. Now they belonged to aliens who had made sure humans could never return. But today, that was going to change. The first sign of trouble came when the long-range sensors picked up the human ship. A small alien patrol boat was checking cargo ships near the edge of the system. Its pilot was a young Zenthari named Grix, who had never seen anything more dangerous than a smuggling vessel. When his screens showed the approaching ship, Grix thought there was a mistake. The vessel was massive. Bigger than a space station and moving faster than anything had a right to move. He tried to send a challenge message asking the ship to identify itself, but got no answer. The black ship just kept coming. Grix sent an emergency signal, back to his base. His voice was shaking as he reported what he was seeing, a ship of unknown design approaching the system at high speed. No response to communications. Weapon signatures unlike anything in the database. The message traveled through the Galactic communication network faster than light, jumping from relay to relay until it reached the military headquarters on Prima Central. Admiral Zeph was eating his morning meal when the alert came through. He was a tall, thin alien with 4 arms and eyes that could see in many different colors. The report made no sense to him. Unknown ship design was impossible. Every vessel in the galaxy was registered and tracked. There were no unknown ships, only pirates with stolen vessels. But this ship was too big to be stolen and too advanced to be built by criminals. More reports started coming in from other systems. The mysterious ship was leaving a trail of panic behind it. Alien vessels were fleeing from its path, sending messages about a massive warship that looked like nothing they had ever seen. Some of the older aliens were starting to whisper a word that had not been spoken in centuries. Human Captain Jiho stood calmly on his bridge as the reports of fleeing aliens reached his communications officer. He had expected this reaction. The galaxy had spent 300 years trying to forget that humans existed. They had convinced themselves that the scary stories were just myths, that humans were just another peaceful species locked away in their home system. But humans remembered everything. They remembered being attacked by aliens who feared them. They remembered fighting wars against impossible odds. They remembered winning battles that should have been lost. And most importantly, they remembered being driven back to Earth and told never to leave. Chief Engineer Tai-Ho Choi was in the engine room making sure everything was working perfectly. The fusion reactors that powered the Retribution were 50 times more efficient than anything the aliens had. His people had spent centuries perfecting every system while the galaxy grew soft and comfortable. The weapons systems were ready too, energy cannons that could crack planets, railguns that could punch. Through anti-armor missiles that could track their targets across star systems, the aliens had forgotten how to fight, but humans never forgot how to build things that could kill. As the Retribution moved deeper into alien space, the warning systems, that had been silent for centuries, began to activate ancient beacons, left over from the old wars, started broadcasting their messages in a dozen languages, warning Terran quarantine zone, unauthorized vessels will be destroyed. Stay away from the humans. But the warnings were old, and the humans were new. This was not the desperate species that had been beaten back to their home world. This was humanity, grown strong and smart and very, very dangerous. They had spent 300 years turning their defeat into preparation for victory. On Prima Central, the emergency meetings were starting. Alien leaders who had not spoken to each other in years were suddenly calling each other, asking the same questions. Who were these humans? How had they gotten so strong? What did they want? The answers scared them more than the questions. The truth was simple but terrifying. Humans were the only species in the galaxy that had evolved as hunters. Every other race had developed as prey animals or scavengers, or plant eaters. But humans had climbed to the top of their food chain by being better at killing than anything else on their world. This made them different in ways the peaceful galaxy could not understand. While other species looked for ways to avoid conflict, humans studied it. While aliens hoped for the best, humans prepared for the worst. And while the galaxy enjoyed 3 centuries of peace, humans used that time to become unstoppable. Captain Jiho received a message from Earth Command. Far behind him in the Sol system, the message was short and simple. Proceed as planned. The galaxy will accept us as equals or learn why their ancestors were wise to fear us. Lieutenant Commander Somin. Kim was studying the intelligence reports that had been gathered about the alien civilizations. They were weak, she realized. Their armies were ceremonial. Their weapons were designed for crowd control, not war. Their ships were built for comfort, not battle. The galaxy had forgotten that peace was. Not natural peace was something that strong people gave to weak people when the strong people decided to be merciful. But mercy was a choice, and choices could be changed as the Retribution continued toward its destination. Alien governments across the galaxy were dusting off old plans that had not been used in centuries. Emergency protocols were activated, ancient bunkers were powered up. Generals who had never fought anything more dangerous than pirates were suddenly trying to remember how. Wars were supposed to work, but they were too late and they were too weak, and most importantly, they were too scared. The humans were coming back, and this time they would not be driven away. This time the galaxy would learn what it meant to share space with the greatest predators ever to reach the stars. The black ship moved through the void like death itself, quiet and unstoppable, carrying within it the power to change everything. The age of human isolation was ending. The age of human expansion was about to begin. And every world in the galaxy was about to remember why they had learned to fear the sound of human engines in the dark. The news hit the galaxy like a shock wave that nothing could stop. Within hours, every major news network was broadcasting the same terrifying headline, "Human vessel spotted in forbidden space." The words spread from world to world, faster than light, itself carrying panic to every corner of known civilization. On the water world of Aquatica, the fish-like nautilians dove deep into their ocean cities. Their gills fluttered with fear as they remembered the old stories their grandparents had told. Stories of humans who could hold their breath longer than seemed possible and fight underwater like born sea creatures. The Nautolan Defense Force sent every available ship racing toward the deep ocean trenches where they could hide. The insect. Worlds of the Hive Collective buzzed with activity that had not been seen in centuries. Queen Vex stood in her crystal chamber, surrounded by thousands of her children as urgent messages flowed through their mental link. The warrior castes that had been used only for ceremony suddenly found themselves being fitted with real weapons and armor that had not been worn since the old wars. Even the ancient void dwellers who lived in the cold space between stars began sending worried messages to anyone who would listen. These beings were older than most civilizations, and they remembered things that others had forgotten. They remembered what humans could do when they were angry and desperate, and most importantly, they remembered that humans never forgot anything. The Galactic News Network headquarters on Prima Central had never seen anything like the chaos that erupted that day. Reporters from 100 different species were shouting questions and demanding answers that no one could give. News director Voss, a tall gray being with too many eyes, tried to maintain order, but even he was shaking with fear. Every screen in the building showed the same image captured by a long-range scanner. The human ship looked like a black dagger cutting through space, surrounded by energy fields that made it impossible to get clear pictures. But what they could see was enough to terrify anyone who understood spacecraft design. The ship was not just big, it was perfect. Every line and curve had been designed for maximum efficiency and maximum lethality. There were no wasted spaces, no decorations, no signs of the comfort that alien ships always carried. This was a vessel built by a species that understood war in ways the galaxy had tried to forget. Fleet Admiral Zeph stood in the command center of the Council Defense Force, staring at tactical displays that showed the human ship's path through space. His 4 eyes moved independently as he tried to process information that made no sense according to everything he thought he knew about technology and warfare. The human ship was moving at speeds that should have torn any vessel apart. The energy readings suggested power levels that should have required a small star to generate. And the weapons signatures were unlike anything in any database. Some of his analysts thought their sensors were malfunctioning, but Zeph knew better. The sensors were working fine. Reality had just become much more dangerous. Counselor Vex burst into the command center, his tentacles writhing with the anxiety that all his species felt when they were scared. His voice was high and shaky as he demanded answers that Zeph could not give. How had the humans gotten past the sensor networks that watched the borders of their quarantine zone? How had they built ships that were centuries ahead of galactic technology? The truth was that no one had been watching the humans very carefully. The quarantine zone was considered a solved problem. Humans were trapped in their home system with technology that was primitive and outdated. The Council had assumed they would stay that way forever, slowly declining into a peaceful agricultural society that posed no threat to anyone. But humans had never stopped working. They had used their isolation to focus on the things they did best, building better weapons, designing better ships, training better soldiers. While the galaxy enjoyed art and philosophy and comfortable lives, humans had spent 3 centuries preparing for the day when they would return to the stars. Admiral Zeph called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Within an hour, representatives from the major military powers were gathered in the secure conference room. Their faces showed fear, but also confusion. None of them understood what they were dealing with. General Cross of the Titan Confederacy was the first to speak. His massive frame shook the floor as he moved to the central display. His people were warriors, by tradition, but even they had grown soft during the long peace. The weapons they carried were more for show than actual fighting. "We need to intercept them," he growled in his deep voice. "Send the Third Fleet to block their path and demand they return to their quarantine zone. Show them that the galaxy will not tolerate this violation of our laws." Admiral Zeph wanted to laugh, But the situation was too serious. The Third Fleet was the most powerful force in the galaxy, 50 ships armed with the best weapons and shields that peaceful civilizations could build. But compared to what his sensors were showing him about the human vessel, it would be like sending children with toys to stop a natural disaster. The discussion continued for hours, but everyone knew they were just making noise to avoid facing the truth. The galaxy had no defense against this new threat. They had spent centuries assuming that peace was permanent, that war was a thing of the past, that the scary stories about humans were just myths to frighten young aliens. Meanwhile, aboard the Retribution, Captain Jiho was reading intelligence reports that his officers had compiled about the current state of galactic civilization. What they had learned would have been funny if it was not so pathetic. The great military powers of the galaxy had armies that existed mainly for parades. Their weapons were designed to stun rather than kill. Their ships were built for comfort rather than combat. Commander Yuna Lee was reviewing the tactical situation with her senior staff. The alien response was exactly what they had expected. Panic followed by confusion, followed by desperate attempts to organize some kind of resistance that would be completely useless. Chief Engineer Taiho Choi had been analyzing the alien technology that their sensors could detect from long range. The results confirmed what human intelligence had suspected for decades. The galaxy had not just stagnated during the peaceful centuries. They had actually regressed in some areas. Their fastest ships could barely reach half the speed of human cargo haulers. Their most powerful weapons could not penetrate the basic shielding on human civilian vessels. Their communication systems were so primitive that it took them hours to coordinate even simple movements. Lieutenant Commander Somin Kim was perhaps the most amazed by what they were discovering. She had studied alien psychology and culture for years, but seeing the reality was still shocking. The galaxy had convinced itself that humans were just another species, that peace was natural, that violence was an aberration that could be controlled with laws and treaties. But humans knew better. They understood that peace was just. The time between wars, that violence was always possible, that the strong survived and the weak became history. The galaxy was about to learn these lessons the hard way. As the Retribution continued toward its destination, alarms were sounding on thousands. Of world's emergency governments were being formed. Military reserves that had not been activated in centuries were being called up. Weapons factories that had been converted to making consumer goods were being hastily converted back. But it was all too little and too late. The humans were coming, and they were stronger than anyone had imagined. They had spent 3 centuries turning their greatest defeat into preparation for ultimate victory. They had taken the galaxy's rejection and used it to become the most dangerous force in known space. The age of galactic peace was ending. The age of human expansion was about to begin. And every world that had ever heard the name of humanity was starting to remember why their ancestors had been. Wise to fear the species that refused to stay dead. New Geneva Station hung in space like a giant wheel made of metal and crystal. Its designers had built it as a symbol of everything good about galactic civilization. Here, representatives from 1,000 worlds could meet in peace and friendship, to discuss trade and solve problems without violence. The station had been humanity-free for 300 years, and everyone liked it that way. Station Commander Nara stood in her office, high in the central tower, watching through the great windows, as ships approached and departed in endless streams. Her people, the Silvani, were known for their calm wisdom and careful thinking, but today she felt something she had never experienced before: pure terror. The reports coming in from the outer sensor networks made no sense. A human warship was approaching the station, moving at impossible speeds and ignoring all attempts at communication. The ship was larger than anything in the station defense fleet, and the energy readings suggested weapons. that could destroy entire worlds. Commander Nara had studied the old histories in school, like every young alien she knew about the Terran Wars, when humans had fought the entire galaxy and nearly won. She had read about their refusal to surrender. Even when facing impossible odds, their ability to turn defeats into victories, their terrifying skill at finding new ways to kill their enemies, but those were old stories from a different time. The humans had been beaten and locked away in their home system where they belonged. The galaxy had moved on to better things, like art and philosophy and comfortable living. Everyone knew that humans were probably extinct by now, or at least harmless. The first visual contact came when the human ship was still 1,000,000 kilometers away. The long-range cameras showed a vessel that looked like it had been designed by nightmares. Black metal that seemed to absorb light energy fields that made space itself bend around the hull. Weapon ports that could unleash destruction beyond imagination. All across the station, alien civilians were packing their belongings and heading for the nearest ships. Cargo haulers that normally carried trade goods were being converted to passenger vessels as quickly as possible. The docking bays that were usually busy with commercial traffic became chaos as everyone tried to leave at once. Captain Ji-ho Kim stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching New Geneva Station grow larger on his screens. The massive structure was beautiful in its own way, a testament to what civilized beings could accomplish when they worked together, but it was also a symbol of the peace that had kept humanity locked away from the stars. They had been born to explore, Lieutenant. Hyejin Cho was reviewing the cultural and diplomatic files about the species they would be meeting. She was young for such an important position, but she had spent years studying every known alien language and custom. Her job was to make sure the aliens understood exactly what humanity wanted and exactly what would happen if they did not get it. The station defense force had been scrambling their ships since the human vessel was first detected. 12 patrol boats armed with crowd control, weapons, and one old destroyer that had been built during the last minor conflict between the Veltani Empire and the Crystal Collective. The combined firepower of the entire defense fleet would not even scratch the paint on the human warship commander. Yuna Lee was coordinating the approach with her navigation team. The Retribution could have docked at any port it chose simply by forcing its way through any resistance, but Captain Ji-ho had ordered a more dramatic approach. They would dock at the Central Bay where the most important diplomatic meetings were held. The closer they got to the station, the more panic spread through the alien population. Some species were naturally brave and tried to stay calm, but even they could not ignore what their sensors were telling them. The human ship carried enough firepower to destroy the station, and every ship around it, without even slowing down, point defense turrets that were designed to stop small asteroids tracked the approaching human vessel. But no one dared to fire. Everyone knew that shooting first would start a war that the galaxy could not win. The humans had made their intentions clear by ignoring all warnings and continuing their approach. Station Commander Nara received an emergency message from the Galactic Council telling her to deny docking permission to the human ship and to maintain safe distance at all costs. But the humans were not asking for permission, and safe distance was not an option when dealing with a vessel that could probably destroy planets. Captain Ji-ho opened a communication channel to the station for the first time since their arrival. His voice was calm and professional as he spoke in perfect galactic standard, a language that humans were not supposed to know. This is Captain Kim of the UES Retribution, requesting immediate docking at Central Bay 7. The words sent shockwaves through the station, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no fear in his voice, no uncertainty, no recognition that he was violating laws that had stood for 3 centuries. He spoke like someone who expected to be obeyed. Commander Nara tried to refuse docking permission, but her voice shook as she spoke. The human captain simply repeated his request, adding that he had important business with the station authorities and would appreciate their cooperation in making his visit as smooth as possible. The threat was never stated directly, But everyone understood. The humans were going to dock whether permission was granted or not. The only question was whether it would be done peacefully or whether the station would be forced to explain to the galaxy why they had started shooting at a diplomatic mission as the retribution. Moved toward the docking bay. Alien security forces took positions throughout the station. Council enforcement troops in their ceremonial armor tried to look ready for trouble, but their weapons were designed for crowd control, not warfare. Their training was for handling drunk traders and minor disputes, not facing soldiers from the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The docking process itself was a masterpiece of intimidation. The human ship settled into the bay with impossible precision, its engines silent but radiating power that made the station shake. The airlock extended and sealed with mechanical sounds that somehow seemed threatening to everyone who heard them. Captain Jiho prepared to make history as he walked toward the airlock. Behind him came his honor guard, 6 human Marines in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. Their weapons were not drawn, but everyone could see that they were ready for trouble. Their faces were calm, but their eyes missed nothing. The moment the airlock opened and Captain Jiho stepped onto New Geneva Station, the age of human isolation officially ended. The aliens who saw him first noticed immediately that he looked different from the old pictures, taller, stronger, more confident. This was not a member of a defeated species begging for mercy. This was a predator who had come to reclaim his territory, station commander. Nara met them in the main corridor, flanked by her own guards, who looked like children next. To the human Marines, she had practiced this moment in her mind 100 times, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of facing a human captain who looked at her like she was not very important. "Your presence here violates Council Decree 2847, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Humans are restricted to the Sol system and forbidden from leaving without express permission from the Galactic Council Captain." Jiho smiled, and every alien who saw that expression felt their blood turn cold. It was not the friendly smile of someone seeking cooperation. It was the smile of someone who had all the power and was enjoying the fact that everyone else knew it. "That decree is no longer in effect," he replied calmly. "Humanity has new terms to discuss with the Council. We request an immediate audience with the appropriate authorities." The word request was used, but everyone understood it was really a demand. The age of asking permission was over. The age of human expansion had begun, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to negotiate with a species that had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. The Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen anything like the chaos that erupted when the emergency session was called. Representatives from across the galaxy abandoned their normal schedules and raced to Prima Central using the fastest ships they could find. The massive chamber, designed to hold thousands of beings in comfortable discussion, now felt cramped and dangerous as species that had not spoken in decades demanded answers that no one could give Prime Counselor. Thane stood at the central podium trying to maintain order with his ceremonial staff, but his ancient hands were shaking. The old being had lived through the original Terran wars, and he remembered things that others had tried to forget. He remembered human tactics that turned certain defeats into impossible victories. He remembered the sound of human war cries echoing through the corridors of captured alien ships. The noise in the chamber was incredible. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, creating a wall of sound that hurt to hear. The crystalline collective chimed their objections in harmonic frequencies that made the walls vibrate. The void, hunters roared challenges that sounded like the screaming of dying stars. Even the peaceful Garden Worlds had sent their representatives to demand action. Ambassador Kira from the Veltani Empire stood at her podium, waving her scaled arms for attention. Her voice carried across the hall as she spoke the words that everyone was thinking. How did they get so strong? Where have they been hiding this technology? Why are they here now? The questions hung in the air like accusations, but no one had answers. The intelligence services of the major powers had spent centuries assuming that humans were no longer a threat. Their reports spoke of a declining population, primitive technology, peaceful agricultural settlements scattered across a few worlds in the Sol system. But those reports were wrong, and everyone was starting to understand just how wrong they were. The human ship that had appeared at New Geneva Station carried technology that was decades ahead of anything the galaxy possessed. Its mere presence had sent shockwaves through every military organization and caused panic. On 1,000 worlds, Elder Voss of the Titan Confederacy rose from his seat, his massive frame causing the floor to shake as he moved. His people were the traditional warriors of the galaxy bred for size and strength, but even they looked small compared to the human marines that had been recorded at the station. We should have destroyed them when we had the chance. He growled, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. 300 years ago, we drove them back to their home world. But we were too merciful. We should have finished what we started instead of letting them hide and grow strong. The words caused an uproar, but underneath the noise was something else. Fear. Every being in the chamber knew that Elder Voss was right. The galaxy had defeated humanity in the Great Wars, but they had chosen mercy over complete victory. They had allowed the humans to retreat to their home system instead of hunting them down and finishing them off. Now that mercy looked like the greatest mistake in galactic history. The humans had used their 3 centuries of isolation to become something far more dangerous than they had ever been during the original wars. They had learned from every defeat, studied every weakness, and built solutions to every problem that had once held them back. Captain Jiho entered the assembly hall flanked by his officers, and the sight of them caused the chamber to fall silent for the first time since the session began. He was not tall by human standards, but he seemed to tower over the alien delegates as he walked to the central speaking area. His uniform was simple black fabric with minimal decoration, but somehow it looked more impressive than the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by the alien representatives. Lieutenant Commander Soman Kim carried a datapad containing the complete historical records that humanity had compiled during their isolation. The true story of the Terran Wars was very different from the version that the galaxy preferred to remember. In the human records, every major battle showed the same pattern. Aliens attacking first humans, defending themselves, and winning through superior tactics and unbreakable determination. Commander Yuna Lee kept her hand near her sidearm. Not because she expected immediate trouble, but because humans always prepared for the worst. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the chamber for potential threats and escape routes. Every human officer had been trained to fight their way out of any situation, and the aliens could sense that readiness like a predator. Captain Jiho reached the speaking podium and looked up at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. Some showed curiosity, some showed fear, but all of them showed the recognition that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The age of human isolation was over, and no law or treaty was going to bring it back. Honored counselors. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the chambers. Acoustic systems without any amplification. Humanity returns to the galaxy not as conquerors, but as equals demanding our rightful place among the stars. The simple words caused another uproar, but Captain Jiho continued speaking as if the noise did not exist. We come in peace, but we will not be turned away. We offer cooperation, but we will not accept subjugation. We seek trade and friendship, but we will not tolerate being treated as criminals for leaving our home. Elder Voss interrupted by standing and pointing one massive finger at the human captain. You speak of peace. Your species burned entire worlds. The massacre of Proxima. 7. The siege of Beta Station. The destruction of the Crystal Gardens. We have not forgotten what your kind is capable of. Captain Jiho's expression hardened, and every alien in the chamber felt the temperature seem to drop several degrees. And we have not forgotten being attacked first, he replied calmly. Every human action was a response to alien aggression. Your histories have been edited to make yourselves look like victims, but we kept the real records. Lieutenant Hyejin Cho activated the holographic displays around the chamber, showing documents and recordings that the galaxy had thought were destroyed. Centuries ago, the images told a different story than the one taught in alien schools. Humans fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, never striking first, but always striking back harder when attacked. The evidence was undeniable and devastating. Alien fleets bombarding human colonies without warning, human civilians being killed by the millions while their governments tried to negotiate peace, human worlds being invaded by species that had decided the new arrivals were too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The truth, Captain Jiho continued, is that the galaxy feared us, not because we were evil, but because we were effective. We won battles you thought impossible. We survived disasters that would have destroyed other species. And when you finally managed to drive us back to Earth, we spent 3 centuries becoming even stronger. The silence that followed was deafening. Every being in the chamber understood what they were hearing. The humans had not spent their isolation period, declining into peaceful farmers. They had used every year, every day, every hour to prepare for their return to the galaxy, and now they were back with technology and capabilities that made their ancestors look primitive. Prime Counselor Thane finally found his voice. "What do you want from us?" he asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. Captain Jiho smiled, that predator smile that had terrified aliens throughout history. "We want what every species wants," he said simply. "The right to exist in peace. The right to trade with other worlds. The right to expand and grow and explore the galaxy that belongs to all intelligent life." He paused and looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. But most importantly, he continued, "We want recognition that humanity is no longer the weak species you remember. We are stronger now, much stronger, and this galaxy is going to learn to make room for us, whether it wants to or not." The threat was clear, and so was the promise. The humans were back to stay, and they were not asking permission anymore. They were simply informing the galaxy of the new reality. The age of human expansion had begun, and nothing was going to stop it. The negotiations lasted 3 days, but everyone in the galaxy knew the outcome was decided before they even began. Captain Jiho sat across from the finest diplomats that the council could gather and calmly presented terms that would reshape galactic civilization. His voice never rose, never showed anger or impatience, as he explained what humanity wanted and what would happen if they did not get it. The conference room overlooked the great assembly hall where thousands of alien representatives waited for news of the discussions. Inside the smaller chamber, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Prime Counselor Thane sat at the head of the table looking older than his many centuries, while his advisors whispered frantically among themselves first. Captain Jiho stated, reading from the carefully prepared document that Lieutenant Commander Soman Kim had compiled, "The Terran quarantine is officially ended. Human vessels will have free passage through all established trade routes without restriction or special permit requirements." The simple statement destroyed 300 years of galactic policy with a few words. Council President Thane's hands shook as he made notes on his tablet. The quarantine had been the foundation of galactic security. The one law that everyone agreed was necessary to maintain peace. Second, humanity claims colonization rights to any uninhabited systems within 50 light years of our current territorial boundaries. We estimate this includes approximately 40 star systems with planets suitable for human settlement. Veltani, Ambassador Kira, tried to object, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Those systems fall within our sphere of influence, she managed to say. They have been reserved for. Future Veltani Expansion Commander Yuna Lee, who had been silent until now, turned to look at the ambassador with eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. Your sphere of influence ended the moment your battle fleets ran from a single human ship, she said coldly. The galaxy watched your vessels flee at maximum speed, rather than face us in combat. The truth of her words stung every alien in the room, because everyone had seen the recordings, entire fleet groups abandoning their positions when the retribution appeared on their sensors, military commanders who had trained for decades, suddenly discovering urgent business in other systems. Captain Jiho continued reading the terms while alien delegates listened in stunned silence. Humanity wanted trade agreements on equal terms, not the restricted commerce they had been forced to accept in the past. They demanded representation in the Galactic Council proportional to their population size. Most shocking of all, they wanted access to the classified historical archives. Ambassador Kira found her voice again. The historical records are sealed for good reason, she protested. Some information is too dangerous to be made public. Releasing those files could destabilize entire civilizations, Lieutenant. Commander Soman Kim smiled in a way that made every alien in the room uncomfortable. We already have most of the information, she said quietly. Human intelligence services have been very busy during our isolation. What we want is official recognition. That our version of events is accurate. Chief Engineer Taiho Choi had spent the 3 days analyzing every ship and weapon system he could scan from the station. His report to Captain Jiho was devastating, but not surprising. Their technology is centuries behind ours, he had written. Their fastest ships could not catch our slowest cargo hauler. Their most powerful weapons could not penetrate our basic defensive shields. The galaxy had grown soft during the long peace. While aliens focused on art philosophy, and comfortable living humans had never stopped preparing for war. Every defeat from the old conflicts had been studied, every weakness identified and eliminated, every advantage maximized and improved. The cultural exchanges were handled by Lieutenant Hyejin Cho, who met with nervous alien diplomats trying to understand humanity's true intentions. She patiently explained the same thing over and over. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be part of it again, but this time as equals, not as subjects. Some of the younger aliens asked questions that showed how little their education had taught them about human capabilities. They wanted to know if the stories were true about humans being able to survive in environments that would kill other species, about their ability to keep fighting even when badly wounded, about their refusal to surrender, even when facing certain death. The answers terrified them because they were all true. Humans had evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. They had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, and dozens of other disasters that would have wiped out softer species. This had created a people who could adapt to almost any environment and who never gave up. No matter how bad things got, by the end of the 3rd day, even the most stubborn alien delegates understood that they had no choice but to accept humanity's terms. The alternative was war, and war with humanity was something the galaxy could not win. The old records showed what humans were capable of when they were desperate and outnumbered. Now they were strong and confident and backed by technology that made their ancestors look primitive. The galaxy's combined fleets could not hope to match even a single human battle group. The choice was simple: accept humanity as equals, or watch galactic civilization burn. The new Galactic Accords were signed in a ceremony that was broadcast across the galaxy. Prime Counselor Thane's signature looked shaky as he added his name to the document that officially readmitted humanity to galactic civilization with all the rights and privileges of a major power. The quarantine zone became the Terran expansion sector. Human colonies would spread across dozens of worlds that had been empty for centuries. Human ships would carry trade goods through routes that had been forbidden to them. Human representatives would help make laws that affected trillions of lives. Most importantly, the galaxy officially acknowledged that the old histories had been wrong. Humanity had not been the aggressor in the ancient wars. They had been defending themselves against species that had decided to exterminate them simply because they were different. Captain Jiho stood before the assembled delegates as the signing ceremony concluded. His uniform looked the same as it had 3 days earlier, but somehow he seemed different. More relaxed, perhaps, or maybe just satisfied that justice had finally been done. The age of human isolation is over, he announced to the chamber and to the galaxy that was watching. The age of human expansion begins now. We return to the stars not as conquerors, but as equals. We offer friendship and cooperation to all species that accept us as we are. He paused and looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the eyes of delegates who were still trying to understand how completely their world had changed. But make no mistake, he continued. We will not be driven away again. We will not be contained or restricted or treated as second-class citizens. The galaxy will learn to make room for humanity whether it wants to or not. The ceremony ended with the traditional music of a dozen species playing together in harmony. But everyone who heard it knew that the real music was different now. There was a new instrument in the Galactic Orchestra, and its voice was stronger than all the others combined. Humanity was back among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same. The ghost species had returned from the dead stronger and more determined than anyone had imagined possible, and every world that had ever heard human footsteps would soon hear them again. 6 months after the Retribution first appeared in alien space, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Human cargo ships moved through trade routes that had been closed for centuries, carrying goods and ideas between worlds that had never known direct contact with Earth's children. The old quarantine zone had become the busiest sector in known space as humanity expanded outward like a rising tide. Admiral Jiho Kim stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the UES Dominion, watching construction. Crews build humanity's first major space station outside the Sol system. The workers included both humans and alien species that had once fought desperate wars, now labored side by side to create something neither could have built alone. The Centauri station was taking shape faster than anyone had believed possible. Its 16 massive docking bays could handle the largest ships in the galaxy, while its manufacturing facilities produced everything from basic tools to advanced weapons systems. The defensive platforms surrounding the station carried enough firepower to protect an entire sector from any conceivable threat. Commander Una Lee now held the rank of fleet commander and controlled more ships than most species had ever built. Her vessels patrolled the expanding human territories, ensuring that the new colonies received protection while they established themselves. The aliens who had once fled from a single human ship now watched entire battle groups pass through their systems. Most of the alien governments had accepted the new reality with surprising grace. The trade benefits alone were worth the political adjustments as human technology and efficiency created wealth that benefited everyone. Some species discovered that products they had struggled to manufacture for centuries could be easily produced in human factories. The Veltani Empire had been among the first to establish formal trade agreements with humanity. Their beautiful crystal sculptures were now popular throughout human space, while Veltani merchants marveled at human manufacturing techniques that could create complex devices in minutes rather than months. Lieutenant Colonel Minho Park had been promoted to head of intelligence operations across 3 sectors, and his reports painted a detailed picture of how alien civilizations were adapting to humanity's return. Some species welcomed human expertise and technology. Others plotted in secret, hoping to find some way to drive humanity back into isolation. Let them plot. Admiral Jiho told his senior staff during their weekly briefing, "We are not the desperate refugees they remember from 3 centuries ago. We are stronger, smarter, and better prepared than any military force in galactic history." The truth of his words was evident everywhere. Human medical advances were saving alien lives across the galaxy. Diseases that had plagued certain species for generations were being cured with treatments developed in human laboratories. Human engineering was solving infrastructure problems that had puzzled galactic scientists for decades. Chief Engineer Taiho Choi had been busy establishing human manufacturing centers on a dozen worlds. His factories produced everything from basic consumer goods to advanced starship components using techniques that alien observers found almost magical in their efficiency. The most significant changes were happening on Earth itself, where President Minji Park addressed a population eager to reclaim their place among the stars. Volunteer recruitment centers were overwhelmed with applicants wanting to serve on colony ships, exploration vessels, and trading expeditions. Universities created new programs to train diplomats, engineers, and cultural specialists for galactic service. Captain Daeho Sung commanded one of the new colony ships carrying 10,000 settlers to establish humanity's fifth world outside the Sol system. His passengers included families who had waited generations for the chance to see New Skies farmers who would grow Earth crops in alien soil and scientists who would study phenomena that existed nowhere in human space. The colony ships were marvels of human engineering carrying everything needed to establish civilization on a new world. Self-contained manufacturing systems could produce tools and machines from raw materials. Genetic banks held samples of Earth life that could adapt to new environments. Defense systems could protect the colonies until military support arrived. Lieutenant Hyejin Cho had been assigned to the new diplomatic corps, where she worked with alien representatives who were still adjusting to humanity's return. Her job was to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to conflicts, but also to make sure that other species understood the consequences of threatening human interests. The cultural exchange programs were perhaps the most interesting development. Young aliens came to human universities to study engineering and military science. While human students learned alien languages and customs, some relationships were forming between species that promised to change both civilizations in ways no one could predict. But perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed humanity. The old fear remained, but it was joined by respect and even admiration. Humans had accomplished something that seemed impossible, taking their greatest defeat and using it as the foundation for ultimate victory. Galaxy was learning that humans possessed something that other species lacked: the ability to turn any setback into motivation for greater success. Every lost battle became a lesson in tactics. Every failed technology became the starting point for better designs. Every defeat became preparation for eventual victory. Admiral Jiho received regular reports from the expanding human territories, showing colonies that were thriving, trade relationships that were strengthening, and defensive positions that were becoming unassailable. The human sphere of influence grew larger every month as new systems were settled and new alliances were formed. The old alien powers found themselves adapting to a galaxy where humanity was not just present, but dominant human ships controlled the most important trade routes. Human colonies occupied the best available worlds. Human technology set the standards that others struggled to meet. Some species tried to compete by improving their own capabilities, but they discovered that centuries of peaceful stagnation could not be overcome quickly. Others chose cooperation, finding that working with humans was more profitable than opposing them. The Galactic Council had been restructured to reflect the new reality, with human representatives holding positions of real authority. The old laws that had restricted human expansion were replaced with new agreements that recognized humanity's right to grow and explore. As Admiral Jiho watched the construction of Centauri Station continue, he thought about his grandmother, who had lived through humanity's darkest hour when it seemed the species might be wiped out entirely. She had told him stories of the desperate battles and impossible odds that his people had faced. Now her grandson commanded fleets that made the ancient alien armadas look like museum pieces. Human technology had advanced so far beyond galactic standards that some alien observers thought they were watching magic rather than science. Human colonies were spreading across the galaxy faster than anyone had believed possible. The ghost species had indeed returned from the dead stronger and more determined than ever. The galaxy would never again underestimate humanity, and humans would never again allow themselves to be driven from